In the mansion where secrets hid behind glass walls and endless parties, he, the millionaire, lived surrounded by luxury and silence, accustomed to being served without noticing who served him. To him, the blonde maid with the discreet gaze was just another shadow crossing the hallways, carrying trays and cleaning the marks of excess left behind by the wealthy. Her heart, however, held the pain of invisibility and the silent courage of those who endure humiliation in exchange for survival. Until that day. Until the moment when fate, cruel and unexpected, decided that the life of an innocent child would be put at risk. It was at the sound of the desperate scream, the sound of water, and the desperation in the mansion's garden that everything changed. The maid, previously invisible, ran without thinking, and in that plunge her life and his would never be the same. The scream echoed like thunder through the garden. The millionaire's son, who had been playing by the pool, now struggled. Silently beneath the blue water, the guest screamed, his wife froze, and the millionaire, without an immediate reaction, watched his world crumble in seconds. It was then that she, the ignored maid, launched herself without hesitation, diving deep, crossing the pool's broken reflection as if it were the line separating life from death. When she emerged, carrying the child in her arms, soaked, panting but firm, silence fell over everyone. In that moment, he didn't see a maid. He saw the woman, who had just saved the most precious thing in his life. And what began there wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of a forbidden feeling, strong and uncontrollable, that would forever change the fate of that mansion. The mansion stood like a modern palace on the outskirts of Miami, surrounded by immaculate gardens and high walls, separating luxury from the common world. Iron gates opened only for luxury cars, uniformed chandeliers, and high-profile guests. Inside, everything gleamed. Excessively, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden lights, marble floors echoing with firm footsteps, walls adorned with artwork that no one really stopped to admire. The millionaire lived there as if he were part of a never-ending play, surrounded by numbers, contracts, and appearances. His eyes were always on reports and screens, rarely on people. Accustomed to being served, he didn't understand faces, only functions. Among these invisible faces was she, the blonde maid with the sweet, silent gaze. She walked the halls carrying trays, changing tablecloths, collecting party leftovers, and erasing traces of the rich's indifference. She went unnoticed, unremembered, except when something needed to be done, urgently. Her employer, the millionaire's wife, made a point of reminding her of her place. With sharp words, she always found a way to humiliate, to show that she was nothing more than a shadow in that gilded kingdom. Even so, the young woman remained steadfast, silent, sustained by need and the invisible strength that only those who have been ignored know how to cultivate. In the midst of this scenario, there was the child. The millionaire's son, just a few years old, lived like a lonely prince. He had grown up surrounded by expensive toys, but starved for attention. His mother was always busy with parties, trips, and friends who fought over trivialities. His father, meanwhile, immersed in business, saw the boy only at controlled times, as if he were just another part of his schedule. The boy, restless and curious, sought out glances he rarely met, and it was precisely in the maid that he began to notice gestures of humanity he had never seen before in that house. The millionaire, however, didn't notice. He passed her by as if passing through a piece of furniture. He saw the work, not the person. And for his wife, treating her as invisible wasn't enough. She needed to step on him, diminish him, make every moment a test of submission. But fate, silent, waited for the right moment to reverse the order. A detail wouldn't suffice, a glance wouldn't suffice. It would take a shock, something capable of tearing apart the veil of indifference and exposing what truly mattered. And it was in this atmosphere of empty luxury, of false laughter and veiled humiliation, that the seed of the improbable was planted. An invisible young woman, a distant millionaire, an arrogant wife, and a forgotten boy. 4 lives trapped in the same scenario, waiting for a moment that would change everything forever. Mornings at the mansion began early, long before the first rays of sunlight filtered through the enormous glass windows. The maid would wake up in the dark, catch 2 crowded buses, and, exhausted, arrive at the side gate in her uniform, impeccably pressed even if worn with age. She always entered through the same narrow hallway reserved for employees, where the glow of the chandeliers didn't reach, and the floor no longer gleamed like that of the main entrance. It was in this invisible space that she prepared to face another day of work in silence. At breakfast, the ritual was always the same. The main table was set as if for a banquet, even though the family rarely lingered over their meal. The wife liked to show off to her friends who arrived early, displaying exotic fruits, rare cheeses, and imported cakes. The maid meticulously attended to every detail, but it was never enough. All it took was a misplaced cup or a knife turned at the wrong angle for the mistress to raise her voice and express her impatience. "Can't you even get that right? That's why no one like you gets anywhere." Her words were always accompanied by malicious laughter from her friends, as if humiliation were part of the morning's entertainment. The millionaire, sitting at the head of the table, rarely spoke. He simply leafed through the newspaper or responded to messages on his cell phone, oblivious to the scene. Sometimes his eyes would look up for a brief moment, but quickly return to the printed text, as if he hadn't seen anything. For the maid, this silence was a second wound, the first from his wife's contempt, the second from his indifference. Still, he swallowed hard, lowered his head, and continued on, as if his very breath were an apology. In the hallways, far from her family's eyes, the weight of the words echoed. She wondered how long she could bear to live like this, covering her tracks, carrying trays, listening to insults disguised as instructions. But every time she considered giving up, she remembered the small room she shared with her sister in the suburbs, the overdue rent, and the piling bills. It was this need that kept her going, transforming pain into resilience. The millionaire's son, in turn, began to notice things the adults ignored. He saw the tears welling up in the corners of the maid's eyes, noticed the careful way she tidied up her toys, and how she always left a glass of juice on the table, even when no one asked. To the boy, she wasn't invisible. She was somehow the only presence that seemed genuine in that house where everything was excessive, except affection. The wife, increasingly uncomfortable with this silent connection, began to use the child as an instrument of humiliation. "Don't accept anything from her," she would say in front of the maid, in a sharp voice. "You don't need the pity of someone who is nothing." But the boy, silently, kept his affection hidden in small gestures, like when he would run to the maid to show her a drawing before even showing it to his mother. The millionaire remained oblivious, or at least pretended to be. His life was made up of meetings, business deals, and figures. To him, the maid was just part of the functional landscape, like a cog that needed to run quietly. But fate, patient and cruel, was already preparing the moment when this cog would be the only one capable of keeping everything running. And he, who prided himself on never being distracted, would be forced to see what he had ignored for so long. In that routine of identical days, her silence and her boss's arrogance seemed like a never-ending game. But every insult held back, every tear swallowed, every humiliation endured in silence was also an invisible thread being pulled by fate, weaving the plot that would soon change everything forever. It was a Tuesday morning, when the house was still yawning amid the smell of coffee and the distant sound of leaf blowers, that the boy appeared in the pantry with a broken toy car in his hands. The maid was about to pass by, as she always did, but his gaze, insistent and quiet, stopped her. Without asking for anything, he simply placed the toy on the table and waited. She grabbed some tape, a rubber band, a drop of glue forgotten in the pantry, and, with the delicacy of someone mending not an object, but an instant, put the wheels back in place. The boy's smile came like a sunrise. He didn't say thank you. He took 2 steps back, tested the toy on the marble floor, and before leaving, he left a dinosaur sticker on the table, a silent gift she would only notice at the end of her shift. After that, small rituals began to emerge. She would walk through the playroom, pick up scattered pencils and, without attracting attention, line up 3 blank sheets of paper with a glass of orange juice nearby. The boy would sit, draw monsters and airplanes, and always leave a drawing for someone to keep in the kitchen. At the bottom of the page, crooked letters spelled out a name he dared not say aloud. She would carefully fold the paper and hide it in her apron pocket, like someone guarding an amulet. One afternoon he emerged into the garden with his shoelace loose, tripping every 3 steps. His mother had hurried past, his father was on a video call, and the stubborn little boy continued to drag his sneakers along. The maid crouched beside him, without touching them first, waiting for the permission children. Give with their eyes. At the slightest nod, she crossed the laces, tied a tight knot, and added a trick to keep them from coming undone. "This way they won't come undone," she whispered. The boy tested it, ran 2 meters, returned, and extended his foot again, only to repeat the gesture, as if that knot contained the unprecedented sensation of security. There were rainy days when the mansion resembled a giant aquarium. On those days, she would adjust the curtains in the boy's room so the light was soft, exchange the sheets for rocket-printed sets, and leave a blue-covered book on the table. He learned to recognize her by the way things looked. A higher pillow, a blanket folded with the corner turned up for ease, a hastily scribbled note with stars on it, which the housekeeper pretended not to see. That was how the 2-sentence conversations began. "Are you afraid of thunder?" "I'm afraid of everything when I'm alone." "Then today, I'll stay around a little longer," she said, as if speaking to herself, and yet the boy fell asleep faster. In the kitchen, when no one was looking, she would let him taste a still warm biscuit, asking for secrecy with her finger to her lips. He would repeat the gesture, complicit, and the next minute, the sound of heels echoed through the hallway. His wife would enter, perfumed, walking around with the phone in her hand, talking about a Saturday dinner, and the boy would straighten up like a summoned little soldier. The maid would clear the plate before it became an object of rebuke, and the scene would dissipate like smoke. The millionaire, if he passed by the door at that time, would only catch a glimpse of reality. His son sitting, the employee standing, his wife on the phone. 3 points of a triangle he couldn't yet read. Another late afternoon, the two met at the library. The boy reached for an encyclopedia on sharks, too heavy. She quickly climbed the back stairs and lowered the volume, opening to the page with colorful illustrations. They stood side by side, silent, sharing their curiosity like someone breaking bread. The boy pointed out fins. She read short passages, inventing sounds for difficult words. When he asked if sharks get lonely too, she took a second to answer. "Everyone gets lonely sometimes," she said, "but it passes faster when someone's around." He nodded, as if he'd just heard a truth adults don't usually tell. His father's absences began to weigh on the boy's search for a home. The maid didn't occupy him with speeches. She offered routines. She asked him to help her count towels, as she badly needed an assistant. She showed him how the magnolias closed at night. She taught him the trick of whistling with cupped hands. These small missions gave the boy a sense of belonging that the big house lacked, and without realizing it, the mansion began to speak with a different voice when they were around, a voice less cold, less glassy. When the millionaire finally noticed the change, it wasn't a heroic gesture, but the absence of a cry. For weeks the boy had been fussing about going to bed. That night, the house turned down the volume before 10. He slipped through the crack in the door, saw his son lying down, the blue book on his chest, the lamplight adjusted to perfect dimness. The maid wasn't there. She was in the hallway, sitting on the wooden bench, waiting the 5-minute safety precaution before turning out the light. He stopped 2 steps away, thought about thanking her, but the word caught between teeth, trained for orders, not gratitude. Still, his eyes lingered a second longer, and that, in that house, was already a change. The next day, an unsigned note appeared in the pantry. "Thank you for helping with the towels. Assistants receive medals of courage." The medal was a metal button attached to a string. The boy ran out into the garden, displaying the decoration, and for the first time in a long time, his laughter rang through the office wall. The millionaire looked up, confused by the joy that had entered without asking for a password. He didn't know where it came from. He would soon find out. because fate had already chosen the setting to expose in high relief what until then had remained sketchy. The pool, the still water reflecting the Miami sky, distracted adults, loud music, glasses, and lazy steps. In the background of this painting, a curious boy, an attentive maid, and a man who still didn't understand that love, before being. Grand is vigilance in the little things. The music began before sunset, as if someone had decided the night needed to come early. The mansion took on a different public theatrical glow, lanterns lit in the garden, spotlights aimed at the palm trees, waiters crossing the paths with glasses that clinked like little bells. On the terrace, the laughter of his wife's friends spread in waves, and each guffaw seemed to say, "We're on top," while the millionaire, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, greeted investors, distributed handshakes, and made calculated remarks. The pool, the nerve center of the party, reflected the Miami sky in a dark blue mirror, blades of light dancing on the surface as if hiding secrets. It was beautiful, but treacherous. The slippery, freshly waxed edge, toys left by a distracted employee, the metal ladder misplaced in the darkest corner. Everything was set for a beauty that forgives no carelessness. The wife reigned supreme in a dress reminiscent of a magazine. Editorial, choosing targets for her scathing comments like someone pointing out silverware. A guest with an exaggerated necklace, a businessman carrying debts in his eyes, and, inevitably, the maid, there, however, invisible to almost everyone, circulating among trays and orders, silently correcting what luxury cannot fix. She sensed the rhythm of the party with her body, as those who work do. She knew when to replenish the ice before it ran out, where the napkin was missing, the exact moment. The music would swell to drown out difficult conversations. She also knew instinctively where the boy was. She had learned to track his presence by objects, a stroller forgotten near the chaise, the half-empty glass of juice, the children's towel folded at the foot of the umbrella. That night, however, the trail merged with the general rush, and her heart learned to count differently. The millionaire played the role of host with mechanical efficiency, but every now and then his eyes would linger on the boy, who exchanged glances with the band, enchanted by the saxophone, and then disappeared behind a group of guests. He signaled from afar to a security guard, gesturing with his chin in the direction of the little one. The man nodded, but was intercepted by a guest demanding just a minute to sort out a parking issue. At the other end of the lawn, his wife leaned over to whisper that the child needs to learn to behave without a nanny. The sentence, light as a punch, hung in the air without an owner, and no one took it back. The maid, tray in hand, crossed the boy's path for a second. She saw his messy hair, his anxious gait, his aroused curiosity. He was carrying a small plastic boat, a souvenir from a random Saturday, and looked at her as if asking for permission without words. She smiled with her eyes, that small smile of someone saying, "Be careful," and continued on. She left the glasses on the investor's table, refilled 4 others, turned to the garden, and noticed the first detail that didn't add up. The boy's towel was now near the shallow edge, not the chaise longue. Someone had moved it, or someone small had dragged it. On the terrace, a speech began. The millionaire was called to the microphone. He spoke of donations, social impact, and a new project that would bear the family name. Disciplined applause punctuated his promises, and his wife placed her hand on his shoulder as if stamping a window. Meanwhile, a waiter tripped on the rug near the bar. A glass shattered, the metallic sound capturing glances. The band increased the volume to cover the incident. The conversation grew with it, and the garden, for a moment, became a blanket of distractions. The maid, passing through the lights, could hear less of the party and more of what was missing. She couldn't hear the boy's laughter. She sped up, not running. There are ways to run in mansions. The pace seems normal, but the air moves differently. She passed the edge, called his name softly. Once, then again, this time with urgency in the vowel. No one answered. She saw the little boat leaning against the edge of the pool, trapped between the ripples and the edge. She also saw a child's flip-flop, the mark of a damp foot on the marble. The submerged light cast shadows that distorted the bottom, reflections of people shattered on the surface like liquid glass. A guest ordered champagne, his voice piercing her silence without touching her. His wife laughed at something unworthy of laughter. The millionaire ended his speech with a thank you that sounded hollow, like an empty auditorium. Then the boy appeared, not from inside, but from the opposite side of the pool, skirting the edge with the little boat now in his hands again. The moment of the fall seemed to be announced not by a scream or an alarm, but by a dry, discreet sound, as if the boy's body had broken the surface of the water without asking permission. The plastic boat turned sideways, spinning in fragile circles while the little boy disappeared into the turquoise depths. For a second, no one noticed. The music still blared, bowls clinked, conversations overlapped. The world seemed too distracted to notice that a child's life was being extinguished there, just a few meters away. But the waitress noticed. It was the sudden silence of her heart that made her see what other eyes ignored, a childish shadow struggling beneath the water, short arms reaching for air that wouldn't come. The first. Screams came from a guest, who pointed with a trembling hand toward the pool. The millionaire, upon realizing this, dropped the microphone and ran 2 steps, freezing at the water's edge. His wife let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream, unable to move. Chaos ensued in seconds. People crowded together, some shouted for help, others retreated as if the danger were contagious. And amidst them all, only one figure didn't hesitate. The tray fell from the maid's hands, the glasses shattered into 1,000 shards, and she ran without thinking. In one leap she dove deep, breaking through the surface with the certainty of someone who doesn't calculate risks. The icy water enveloped her like a punch, but her eyes were open, fixed on the small figure sinking ever deeper. Her light work dress was in the way. Her shoes were heavy, but she kicked her arms and legs hard, determined. She reached out, felt the fabric of the boy's wet shirt slip for a second, then gripped tightly. Her heart was pounding in her chest, not from the effort but from the fear of being too late. When she pulled the small body to her, his face was already pale, his eyes closed. The climb seemed endless. Every meter of water was an obstacle, every bubble that escaped her mouth a reminder that time was against them. But finally, she broke the surface, emerging with the boy in her arms. The collective scream was immediate, but she didn't hear it. He swam to the shore with a strength he didn't know he possessed, while trembling hands reached out to pull them both up. The millionaire was the first to reach his son, but the shock paralyzed him. He didn't know what to do. It was the maid, kneeling on the marble, who began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, pressing firmly on his small chest. "Breathe, please, breathe," he murmured, ignoring the stares around him. Time seemed to stand still. His wife wept uncontrollably. The guests drew back in a semicircle of anticipation and horror. And the millionaire remained kneeling, his eyes fixed on his son, but also on her, on the woman who, in that moment, was not invisible, but the only one capable of saving everything he had. Suddenly, a gush of water came from the boy's mouth, followed by a loud cough. The sound was greeted as a miracle. He gasped for air, gasping for air as if for the first time. The maid closed her eyes in relief, tears mingling with the drops streaming down her face. The boy, still stunned, clung to her neck, refusing to let go. The millionaire, in shock, touched his son's shoulder, then the maid's arm. His fingers lingered there for a moment, as if searching for an anchor. His wife, overcome with panic and wounded pride, tried to snatch the child from her arms, but the boy resisted, hiding his wet face against the maid's chest. The scene was a shock to everyone. The truth was exposed. In that garden full of luxury, love and courage came not from wealth, but from the woman who had been invisible until then. And in the millionaire's heart, something broke and rebuilt at the same time. For the first time, he didn't see an employee. He saw the woman who had just given his son back his life. Mesmerized by the underwater lights, his face illuminated in a way only childhood knows. The maid wanted to call out to him, but held back the impulse. A wrong cry startles and fright pulls. She took a step, then another, measuring the distance between them like someone measuring the distance between two shores. The floor was too bright. The boy placed the boat in the water, blew lightly to make it move forward, and in a childish reflex, stepped forward with it, 1 foot beyond the safe line. The boat spun. The sheet of water pulled the toy half a palm forward. His body tilted. The maid felt the world contract to the size of a second, and the next, the music exploded with a sax solo that everyone applauded. Everyone except her, who could already see the boy's reflection wavering in the blue, like a star about to fall. The garden, once a stage for celebration and ostentation, was now filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the frail cough of the boy clinging to the maid's neck. The spotlights still illuminated the pool, and the water, once a symbol of luxury, now seemed like an abyss that had nearly swallowed the house's most precious possessions. The guests, once lively, formed a disorderly circle, exchanging glances of shock and embarrassment. Some murmured words of relief, others chose to turn away, unable to bear the scene that shattered all appearances of the evening. The wife was distraught. She tried to get closer, arms outstretched, but every time she touched her son, he flinched, hiding his face against the maid again, as if seeking in her body the strength that had saved his life. This was more painful than any social humiliation. Before everyone, it was clear that the boy didn't recognize her as a safe haven. The designer dress, the expensive perfume, and the practiced smile meant nothing to the child. The wife then resorted to loud, desperate crying, but even her tears seemed artificial, as if pleading more for social pity than maternal love. The millionaire remained standing, soaked from having helped pull the two from the pool, his face serious and his eyes fixed on the scene. He said nothing, but inside him, something stirred as never before. The image of the maid kneeling on the marble, bringing her son back to life, burned into his mind like an indelible seal. It was as if he had finally seen who she was, not the shadow who cleaned hallways, but the woman who, without hesitation, had risked everything to save what money could never buy. The guests, sensing the tension, began to discreetly disperse. Some left in silence, others whispered on the way to their cars, commenting on how the wife had been powerless in the face of the drama. The humiliation this time fell not on the maid, but on the woman who had always prided herself on humiliating. Karma set in discreetly, relentlessly, returning to each the exact reflection of their actions. The housekeeper brought a thick towel to wrap the boy in, but he refused to leave her lap. The millionaire, noticing the scene, leaned over and spoke firmly, but calmly. "Let her take you to the bedroom." It was the first time his voice broke the social barrier between them, and everyone heard. His wife opened her mouth to object, but found a hardness in his eyes she'd never seen directed at her. Embarrassed, she backed away, disguising it with a shake of her head that fooled no one. The maid walked down the mansion's inner hallway with the boy in her arms, still wet, her body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline rush. The servants who had remained inside approached, some with looks of astonishment, others with respect. It was as if, in a matter of minutes, the invisible hierarchy had shifted. She, who had always gone unnoticed, was now the center of everyone's attention. And not out of scandal, but out of heroism. In the bedroom, he carefully laid the boy on the bed. He held her hand, his tiny fingers gripping tightly, as if afraid she would disappear. The millionaire watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his face serious, but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. His wife stayed behind, unable to face the scene without feeling the bitter taste of defeat. The maid adjusted the blanket, ran her hand through the child's damp hair, and whispered something only he could hear. The boy, still breathing heavily, slowly closed his eyes as if finally finding rest. She stood, ready to leave discreetly, but was interrupted by a low, unexpected phrase from the millionaire. "Thank you." It was just one word, but from the mouth of a man accustomed to giving orders, not thanks, it sounded like an earthquake. The maid lowered her eyes, gave a respectful nod, and left, her heart pounding faster than when she dived into the pool. In the living room, the wife tried to rebuild her image, apologizing to the few remaining guests, blaming it on unforeseen circumstances, and claiming everything was under control. But no one believed her. The rumor had already spread. That night, it wasn't the elegant wife or the millionaire husband who shone. It was the invisible maid who, in an act of courage, dispelled the farce of a perfect family in seconds. The following days passed like treading on glass, cautiously but inevitably moving forward. The house, still, permeated by fear, lowered its volume. The boy would wake in the early hours of the morning calling for her, and the housekeeper, for the first time, didn't pretend not to hear. "You can go," she would say in a whisper that sounded like a blessing. The maid would sit on the edge of the bed, quietly counting the seconds between one breath and the next, and only leaving when the little boy, safe, sank back into sleep. At the door, the millionaire watched without a mask, his hands in his pockets as if learning to be unarmed. In one of these moments he risked a question that didn't fit into protocol. "What calms him?" She hesitated, then answered with a simplicity that cut through the air. "Presence. Sometimes, that's all." He nodded, as if receiving a work instruction that was actually a life lesson. Small gestures began to redraw boundaries. The previously cramped staff cafeteria opened with a pot of stronger coffee, sliced fruit, and an unsigned note. "Thank you for yesterday." Her shift was discreetly adjusted to times that wouldn't exhaust her, and a pediatric doctor began visiting the house as per protocol, noting recommendations that, coincidentally, aligned with those she already followed instinctively: routine, soft lighting, listening more than ordering. The millionaire called these changes internal measures. She called them respect. Between them, conversations were confined to hallways. He asked if the boy was eating better. She said yes when the plate came. With colors he recognized. He wanted to know if the little one still avoided water. She taught him to play with bowls and cups, to transform fear into play. The first afternoon the boy agreed to wet his hands in the garden faucet. The two adults stared at each other for a second too long. There was no euphoria, there was relief, and within the relief a recognition that dared not name. At night, when the house slept, there was a silent ritual in the library. She would coincidentally leave a children's book on the table, astronauts, whales, maps, and the next day find a bookmark resting on the very page that would help the boy dream. One of these early mornings, the millionaire surprised her by closing the volume. "My father gave me encyclopedias, but he didn't have time to read them with me," he confessed, looking out the window. She, without looking back, replied with firm sweetness, "Time is what we give when we decide to see." The sentence vibrated on the glass like a lighthouse. Beam. There was also the scene with the coat in the garden. The Miami wind surprised her one late afternoon. The house trembled from the poorly regulated air conditioning, and she went out to gather toys when a shiver ran through her. He appeared silently, held out his own jacket, and by an ancient reflex she wanted to refuse. "Rules don't bend." "Please," he said, and there was a disarming humility in his voice. The fabric weighed heavily on her shoulders like a dangerous choice. It lasted only until the boy called, but it was enough for her memory to register the exact temperature of the care. The boy, the center of this orbit, was transformed before everyone's eyes. He began to laugh loudly again, to sleep without a start, to run zigzaggingly with the courage that only childhood restores. In silent gratitude, he began leaving medals around the house, bottle caps strung on string, polished pebbles, an old button found in a pocket. One of these medals appeared in the millionaire's suit pocket, another pinned to her apron. Neither of them commented. There was no need. His wife noticed the shift in the air without yet being able to name it. She tried to regain control with scheduled parties, identical flowers in every vase, orders that resumed the usual liturgy, but the walls had already learned a different tune. When she raised her voice, the boy shrank. When the waitress breathed near, he expanded. The millionaire began choosing spaces where the young woman's presence would be possible without fanfare. Reduced meetings, discreet departures from the office around the time his son returned from school, a schedule that yielded invisible folds to fit in the priceless. It wasn't romance, it was truth, settling in with careful steps. One late afternoon, the passenger elevator's door jammed shut before it could close completely, trapping the three of them in the same rectangle of silence. He, she, and the boy, who held a drawing of a pool transformed into an ocean. with smiling fish. The little boy pressed the paper to his father's chest, then to hers as if sealing a covenant. "Our ocean," he murmured. The elevator resumed its course, and when the doors opened, each went their separate ways, certain that there was something new in the world, something that couldn't be contained by name tags, contracts, or surnames. Even so, the big house doesn't forgive changes that don't ask permission. The social circle began to notice that the boy was no longer presented as a decorative piece, and that the maid sometimes passed within earshot of conversations that were previously forbidden to her. The glances grew in number and venom. Fate, as always, waited for the moment to pull the strings toward the noise. And those who had the most to lose weren't those who loved. It was those who didn't know how to love. The mansion, already carrying in its air the silent change brought about by the accident in the pool, began to vibrate differently. The servants noticed the boy's whispers calling for the maid, the millionaire's footsteps slowing as she crossed the hallway, a lightness that had previously been absent. Nothing was said, but everything was there, hovering. The wife, with her sharp gaze, needed no proof to feel what she feared most. She was losing control. One morning, she found her son sitting at the kitchen table, laughing as he showed the maid a drawing filled with hearts and a figure in a simple dress holding his hand. His wife snatched the paper from the boy's hands and, in front of the maid herself, tore it to shreds. "Don't get your hopes up, you're not part of this family. And you," she pointed at the boy, her voice hard as steel, "learn not to get attached to those who won't stay." The silence that followed was piercing. The boy cried softly, and the maid silently gathered the pieces of paper, stuffing them in her pocket like someone gathering a wounded memory. In the following days, the cruelty intensified. His wife began giving unnecessary orders, simply to humiliate. She would have the same room cleaned twice, pour glasses that weren't supposed to be used just to force her to do it again, and even criticize the way she breathed. "Do you think you're fooling anyone with that air of innocence? You're nothing but a freeloader, waiting for an opportunity to get ahead." The words came like venom in public, always loud enough for others to hear. The millionaire, present on some of these occasions, kept his face still, but his clenched fists betrayed his pent-up fury. One night, during a dinner with investors, the wife went further. While the maid was serving wine, she interrupted with a false smile. "Be careful with the glasses, gentlemen. Our employee has been too distracted lately, perhaps because she thinks she can occupy a place that isn't hers." The icy laugh that accompanied the sentence sounded like a whip. The maid, even with her face burning with embarrassment, stood firm, placing each glass in its place with dignity. The millionaire, noticing his guest's embarrassment, stood abruptly and ended the dinner early, something unthinkable in his social routine. The wife realized that, with that silent gesture, she had lost some of the authority she believed untouchable. The cruelty wasn't limited to the mansion. Rumors began to circulate discreetly in local society. Women in the wife's circle whispered that the maid was trying to seduce the master, or taking advantage of the child's fragility. These carefully planted insinuations were repeated in the hallways of clubs and restaurants. The maid began to notice strange looks, even on her rare outings, as if she carried a label imposed by those who wielded too much power. The millionaire, informed by a trusted associate about the rumors, returned home in silence that night, passing through the gate as if undergoing a sentence. He found his son sleeping with a toy in his hands next to the improvised medal the maid had given him days earlier. The contrast was devastating. On one side, the innocence of the boy who saw her as a home. On the other, his wife's cruelty, transforming purity into scandal. In the hallway, he passed the maid, who was carrying folded clean clothes. Her eyes, watery, tried to hide her pain. For a moment he wanted to say something to bridge the distance, but he held back. He only let out a barely audible murmur. "Don't believe what they say." She looked up in surprise but didn't answer. She continued on, the silence between them more eloquent than any words. Fate was already sharpening its blades. The wife, in her arrogance, believed she was winning, humiliating the young woman and tarnishing her name. What she failed to realize was that every public insult, every lie spread, was another blow to herself, because those who build empires on poison forget that the poison itself, sooner or later, returns. The morning began with a silence that sounded rehearsed. The wife summoned everyone to the main hall, as if organizing an emergency theater. The maid left the pile of sheets in the pantry and went, still unable to understand why the security guards were stationed at the doors like columns. The boy appeared on the upstairs banister, in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed animal. The housekeeper tried to pull him back, but he resisted, sensing a storm. The millionaire arrived last, his tie still undone, his expression one of someone unwilling to start the day. Before his first sip of coffee, when he saw the scene, he straightened his posture, as if his body sensed danger. The wife held up a bracelet before the group, gleaming in the light like divine proof. She said it had disappeared from the safe and appeared in the laundry area, inside a food box. She spoke slowly, theatrically, choosing her syllables to wound. Of all the people, only one person went to those two places last night. She turned to face the maid, and the room held its breath. The accusation needed no details. The pointed finger was enough. The maid felt her legs tremble inside, but she remained erect. So many times had her voice been taken from her that she had learned to breathe through her eyes. "I didn't touch that," she said quietly, more to her own heart than to the audience. The murmur grew timid. The millionaire took an instinctive step forward, as if trying to put out a fire, and his wife noticed, "I know it's embarrassing, but in this house we do not tolerate breaches of trust. You will be dismissed immediately." She asked with cruel sweetness that the housekeeper make arrangements. The word theft was not said. It wasn't necessary. It was replaced by another, more venomous, inconvenience, a socially acceptable synonym for sweeping dignity under the rug. The boy ran down the steps, disregarding prohibitions. He plunged into her embrace, burying his face in her apron. "She didn't do anything," he said, in a voice that still believed the truth would solve the world. His wife tried to pull him away, but he held on tighter. The image froze in everyone's retinas, the child choosing the lap of the woman who would save his life, the mother dripping anger through her fingers, the father torn between the mask and the obvious. The maid, so as not to turn love into a scandal, knelt down to the boy's level and whispered something only he heard, a promise that courage also means letting go. The little boy cried silently, as those who learn the word goodbye too early do. Two security guards approached without rudeness, but with the formal firmness of someone instructed to escort you to the gate. The millionaire raised his hand, not to stop her, but to restrain her. "No exposition," he said, his deep voice trying to salvage the little humanity left in the scene. His eyes met hers, and for a second, every possible sentence fit there. "Sorry, thank you, stay, it's dangerous, wait." None came out. His business-trained body was unfamiliar with the grammar of what truly matters. In the staff quarters, she gathered up her worn purse, folded her spare uniform, and took a deep breath to pack up the boy's hours of laughter, the blue-covered books, the button-down medal, the jacket that had warmed her in the garden for 3 minutes and an eternity. The housekeeper, tough on the outside, had tears in her eyes. "I know," she simply said, slipping a manila envelope containing documents and what appeared to be an advance payment into the young woman's pocket, a minimal gesture of justice in a land of marble. In the hallway, 2 female employees stepped aside without lowering their heads. Respect needs no speech. In the lobby, his wife waited erect, enjoying the ritual. "Good luck," she blurted, as if offering a poisonous alms. The maid didn't respond. She walked past her, carrying what had never been taken from her, her own posture. The millionaire, a few steps away, made as if to follow her, but stopped, a short, cowardly step, measured by the weight of appearances. All he could do was discreetly push the glass door open so she wouldn't have to touch the cold bar. Things the powerful do when it's too late to do the right thing. In the garden, the Miami air was drier than usual. The merciless morning light revealed dust hidden by night. At the side gate, the boy appeared again, escaping the housekeeper. "Don't go, please." She bent down, wiped away the tear that was running crookedly with her thumb, and smiled as fully as she could. "You are courage," he said, "and courage reminds you how to breathe when you're scared." She handed him the plastic boat she'd carried in her bag since the night of the accident, the toy now repaired with a nearly invisible patch. "Our sea fits here," she added. The boy nodded in the way of someone who understands maps that adults can't see. The street swallowed her up in a few steps, as cities that don't ask for names do. The bus took longer than it should have, and while she waited, she felt the weight and lightness of being on the right side of her own history. Inside, behind the walls, some swore they heard a door slam like a gunshot. Others said it was just the wind. In the office, the millionaire stood before the glass. His tie loosened, and the lump in his throat that contracts can't undo. He didn't run. He didn't speak. But something inside him finally chose a side. And that choice, though silent, would begin to set in motion gears his wife couldn't control. The mansion resumed its luxurious liturgy, but the background music changed. Where before there was only echo, now there was absence, and absence for those who loved late is a hammer. Thus, karma turned another cog in its wheel. The woman who always needed to humiliate left the hall smaller. The one who had so often been invisible walked through the gate with her dignity ablaze. The rest would come in the time of truth, and the time of truth had already begun. The mansion looked the same as ever, chandeliers lit, marble polished, luxury cars driving past the gate with discreet license plates. But to the millionaire, nothing was right. It was as if her absence had erased a layer of color he'd never noticed existed. The breakfast table was spotless, but the juice arrived slightly lukewarm. The bread wasn't sliced exactly how his son liked it, and the napkin, though linen, felt cold. These were details that to anyone else would go unnoticed. To him they were glaring signs that something vital had disappeared. The boy, since leaving, had been silent. He no longer ran through the hallways, no longer laughed with the same spontaneous abandon. In the early days, he looked for her in every corner: the kitchen, the library, the garden. When he couldn't find her, he returned to his room and closed the door, bringing with him a silence too heavy for someone so small. His wife, bothered by her son's melancholy, called in new caregivers, always highly recommended, all impeccable. But none lasted more than a few hours. The boy rejected them, crying until he was breathless, refusing to eat or sleep. With each failed attempt, his wife's irritation grew, and with it, her resentment toward her husband, who watched silently, lacking the courage or perhaps the ability to confront her. The millionaire immersed himself in meetings, but his mind no longer followed with the same precision as before. At an important conference, he found himself distracted by the reflection of a glass of water. He remembered her, kneeling on the marble, saving her son. His heart raced, and he lost the thread of the conversation, something unthinkable for a man known for his coldness in business. At night, instead of sleeping, he would stand on the balcony gazing at the illuminated garden. It was as if he expected to see her crossing the halls again, discreetly, with a tray in her hands, and the silence of someone with more courage than words. Society rumors only increased his unease. His wife's female friends whispered about the maid who wanted to get ahead in the world and the boss who let himself be enchanted. He heard these distorted versions at dinners, at clubs, at meetings, but he no longer had the strength to deny it. The truth, painful and clear, was that he cared. Her absence gnawed at him like a secret that could no longer be kept. One night, the son entered the office carrying the patched plastic boat. He placed it on the desk and said, firmly, "She promised that courage remembers how to breathe." The millionaire, swallowing hard, touched the toy as if touching a relic. He realized that this small object was all that remained of her inside the mansion, and that the promise made to the boy now pierced him as well. His wife, for her part, seemed oblivious. She continued attending parties, showing off her jewelry, smiling in society columns. For her, life continued at the pace of appearances. She didn't realize that each forced laugh only deepened the gulf between her and her husband. He no longer accompanied her to as many events, justifying it with work, but in reality, hiding his refusal to share the same space. The distance didn't stem from fights or arguments. It stemmed from emptiness, and emptiness has a weight that kills more than any confrontation. It was then that the millionaire realized, alone in his office, facing the night-lit city. The entire empire he had built meant nothing without the presence of the one who had saved his son and unwittingly saved him from a sleeping heart. But recognizing her within himself was one thing. Bringing her back would be another, even more difficult battle. And as the clock ticked away in the silence of the mansion, fate, patient as ever, sharpened its gears to expose the injustice the wife believed she had buried. Because karma never forgets. It just waits for the right time to exact its revenge. The following days taught the millionaire a new kind of insomnia. He tried to immerse himself in spreadsheets, but the memory of the farewell in the lobby returned like a beacon in the fog. He went out alone one night, without a driver, driving through unfamiliar streets, and in a modest cafe, heard two voices whispering her name. They said the boss was spreading the word that the maid was a thief, that she had endangered the child, that she was seducing the boss. His mouth went dry. It wasn't just your cowardice, you had poison brewing. He paid the bill without drinking the water, and returned home determined to look where he had never looked before, behind the scenes of his own empire. He called the security chief in the early hours of the morning. He requested access to logs, cameras, safe controls, and staff movements. He didn't raise his voice. His coolness was enough. He advanced frame by frame to the night before the bracelet's discovery, and stopped the image when a huge, impossible-to-mistake ring crossed the screen next to the gloved hand depositing the jewel in the food box. The face didn't appear, but the gesture, the jewel, the time, everything pointed in the same direction. "Archive it, make a copy, store it outside the building," he said, feeling an old disgust rise up, not from someone he loves, but from someone who finally sees. At dawn, he asked the housekeeper for the boarding house's address for the first time. She hesitated, overcame it with a short sigh, and wrote it down on a piece of paper. He didn't go. Upstairs or knock. He left at the front desk an envelope with 3 months' rent receipts and a simple card. "Your name will be cleared." That same day, he contacted a lawyer linked to the foundation bearing his surname to go to the neighborhood grocery store and obtain a formal statement that the debt attributed to the young woman had never existed. That afternoon, he had her community training history checked. She found an old first aid certificate and anonymously paid for its renewal and advanced training with the Red Cross. There was no charity there, there was reparation. Meanwhile, he discussed her immediate future, out of his wife's reach. He called the manager of a Brickell hotel, with whom he had business dealings, asked her to interview a candidate with the utmost discretion, and enclosed 2 letters, one signed by a pediatrician who had treated the boy after the accident, attesting to her competent rescue, the other in his own handwriting, without letterhead, with 3 dry lines: reliable, courageous, indispensable on any team. The manager responded in less than an hour with what he needed to read: interview tomorrow at 9 a.m. When his wife tried to extend the cruelty in social circles, he was already moving on another front. He scheduled a protocol review with the jewelry insurance company, ensuring that an external auditor would officially request the images and records. The word audit cut through the halls like a knife. There was no domestic confrontation or scene. There was a document with deadlines and an email with a copy to lawyers. The poison, accustomed to hiding places, was beginning to see the light. That night, the boy showed up at the office with the plastic boat and asked if the sea really fit there as she had promised. The millionaire replied without metaphors, yes, because courage is memory, and as his son fell asleep on the couch, he signed the transfer of a fund to the foundation to finance first aid scholarships and swimming lessons for public school children, a public gesture born of private pain. The city would see philanthropy. He knew it was a plea for forgiveness translated into action. He learned, through a short message from the hotel manager, that the interview had gone well. He also learned from his son's lighter eyes that she was alive and breathing an air that didn't smell of humiliation. He didn't try to look for the young woman. He guarded his haste like someone guarding a weapon. The truth you gathered needed the right time to land on its feet. And the right time, in the lives of those who have learned to live by appearances is usually at a long table, in front of those who applaud wrongdoing out of fear. When he finally turned off the office lights, he looked at his own reflection in the glass and discovered a man he'd never been, someone who no longer confused silence with neutrality. From then on, each step would be to carefully and precisely pull out the thread his wife had believed she'd hidden so well. Her story would be returned to its rightful place. And the bill always comes. It wasn't a one-time scandal, but a sequence of clarifications. First, the insurance company's formal message confirming the routine review of the safes. Then the security chief arriving at the library with a hard drive in a padded case, his eyes lowered as if he'd rather not be there. The millionaire asked them to log in without ceremony. The room darkened, the image. Leaping onto the wall, empty corridors, the pantry's automatic light turning on, a gloved hand placing the bracelet between boxes of supplies. His face was hidden, but the ring the entire city recognized, shone like a signature. The silence that followed wasn't one of doubt, it was one of calculation. He took a deep breath, made a brief gesture, and asked for copies, one for the auditor, one for legal. The word misunderstanding, so useful to the elite, lost its usefulness. The housekeeper knew before anyone else, not from the images but from the change in the air. Her wife's orders began to sound garbled, her voice escaping from the rim of her glass. The invitations she displayed in the steel refrigerator began to disappear, first the unmissable dinners, then the intimate lunches, until only the constantly changed flowers remained to disguise the smell of truth, the smell of something exposed. Outside, Brickle hurried to the rhythm of the city that never looks. Back. At the hotel, the young woman arrived on time, learned routes, mastered checklists. She no longer wore the mansion's apron, but her discretion remained like a second skin. The manager watched her work among trays and carts, amazed at the precision that doesn't need to humiliate to function. One day, on a high balcony, a child among the guests began choking on a small piece of fruit. There was no panic. She crossed the terrace like someone cutting water, applied the right maneuver, and the fruit sprang to life. The mother wept in thanks, a waiter applauded softly, and the manager noted, updated training, essential resource. The world, which the mansion stubbornly denied, recognized her. On the other side, the millionaire pulled off another trick, a technical meeting in the library, attended by the legal department, the external auditor, and the small circle that had witnessed the expulsion. He discussed protocols, response times, and reputational risks. He didn't raise his voice. He simply projected at the end the 14 seconds in which the ring betrayed its owner. No one said guilty. The lawyer preferred serious inconsistencies. His wife, pale beneath her perfect makeup, tried to maintain her usual theatrics. My goal was to protect the house. The phrase, which would once have been frightening, rang hollow. The security chief jotted down procedures. The housekeeper adjusted the hem of her skirt without lowering her eyes. The millionaire concluded with a simple sentence. In this family, proof replaces hearsay. And he left the room. The news spread slowly, not in headlines but in retreats, invitations cancelled due to scheduling conflicts, previously reserved tables under maintenance, friends who responded with emojis and then disappeared. The social circle, experts in smelling smoke, already knew where not to breathe. The boy, unable to grasp the adult choreography, understood something else. He asked again about our sea. His father, lacking easy answers, began to give the difficult ones. Swimming lessons at the club, sunny afternoons with a life jacket, a dive hand in hand. With each small victory of his sons in the water, the memory of her dive hurt like a scar and healed like medicine. The hotel received a thank you email from the Millionaire's Foundation for welcoming talents who make a difference in the invisible. There was no logo, no signature. There was intent. Days later, the manager commented in the kitchen, "If you want, we have a shift with more responsibility." The young woman accepted without haste, as if she knew that dignity is a step, not an elevator. And then came the inevitable invitation, A charity ball at the hotel itself, with press, donors, and the family featured in the official program. His wife posed, the millionaire adjusted his tie with the ease of someone going into battle. The boy would fit into a photo if humor helped. On the other side of the kitchen, working on the hall's logistics, the young woman lined up tables and tested the lights. She didn't know that the same hall would host the final adjustment of fate. The fuse was lit, images saved in safes, rumors returned to their sender, the boy now stronger before the water, the city ready to applaud whatever was said with courage. The spark was missing, that single phrase in the right place that transforms truth into a sentence and a sentence into a beginning. That night, the millionaire stood before the mirror and saw a stranger with his face. He was no longer the man who mistook silence for neutrality. He was the father of a boy who breathed because of an invisible woman, and above all, he was someone who held in his hands the power to say aloud what no longer fit in his chest. Justice, when it finds the door, doesn't knock. It enters. The night of the ball arrived with the usual pomp, but the air carried something different, an electricity that not even the crystal lights could hide. The hotel ballroom was packed with business people, politicians, and gossip columnists. Photographers milled about, and each shot felt like a verdict. His wife, wearing a red dress with spaghetti straps, strutted with the confidence of someone who still believed that appearances buy truth. The millionaire at her side kept a neutral expression, but deep down the decision had already been made. The boy, brought along as part of the spectacle, held the patched-up plastic boat, a symbol that no one understood, but which said it all. The maid was there too, among the waiters and assistants, tending to the invisible details that kept the machinery turning. She wasn't dressed luxuriously, but she had a dignity so strong that she didn't need adornment. Fate, patient until then, had chosen that room as the final stage. The millionaire's speech was the trigger. Called to the stage, he spoke about philanthropy, social projects, and the importance of investing in those who are forgotten. His voice was firm, but his gaze searched for someone in the crowd who wasn't among the guests. When the audience had settled into the comfort of rehearsed phrases, he paused, took a deep breath, and released the truth that burned within him. Months ago, in this very city, an injustice was committed. Someone was falsely accused, driven from their home and their job. Today, I have proof that this person is not only innocent, but that they were the reason my son is alive. A murmur ran through the room. His wife paled, trying to maintain a smile, but the mask was cracking. He continued, implacable, "Anyone here who has doubts can ask the insurance company for the archived images. There are no rumors, only facts. The dignity they tried to strip her of has been restored. And if today I speak of social projects, it's because I learned in my own home that true heroes don't wear suits or jewelry. They wear courage." The applause began timidly, then grew louder, further embarrassing her, who now felt the eyes turning like blades. Some guests discreetly moved away from her, while others approached the young waitress, greeting her respectfully. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was recognized before everyone. The boy ran to the maid and handed the plastic boat to his father. The millionaire held it up before the audience and said, "This small object represents the life that has returned to me, and it also represents the strength of those who, even when humiliated, have never ceased to be greater than cruelty." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any speech. His wife, in despair, tried to protest, but the words died in her throat. His empire of arrogance was crumbling there before everyone's eyes, and there was nowhere left to hide. The maid, blushing, tried to leave discreetly, but was interrupted by applause that now came from all corners. She didn't ask for it, didn't wait, but she received the respect she had always been denied. The millionaire looked her in the eye, and in that moment, there were no contracts or protocols, only gratitude and something that grew beyond her and him. Karma had given its verdict. Those who humiliate are humiliated. Those who endure in silence are exalted. That night, the wife returned home in silence, carrying not only her social defeat, but the certainty that she had lost what she had never managed to achieve: true love. The boy slept peacefully. the little boat on the bedside table a reminder that courage can be found, even in the smallest of objects, and the maid lying in her simple room wept, not in pain but in relief. The world had crushed her so many times, but she finally recognized that her worth lay not in clothes or surnames, but in her heart. The millionaire remained on the hotel balcony after the event, gazing out at the illuminated city. He knew life would never be the same. He hadn't performed a charitable act, but one of justice. And justice, when delivered the right way, tastes like redemption. And so fate fulfilled its promise. The wheel turned slow and sure. The wife who lived to humiliate ended up surrounded by the contempt she spread. The maid, previously invisible, became a symbol of dignity. And the millionaire finally saw what had always been before his eyes, the greatness that money can never buy, because karma never fails. It just waits for the right moment to return to each person, the reflection of what they offered to the world. In the mansion where secrets hid behind glass, walls and endless parties, he, the millionaire, lived surrounded by luxury and silence, accustomed to being served without noticing who served him. To him, the blonde maid with the discreet gaze was just another shadow crossing the hallways, carrying trays and cleaning the marks of excess left behind by the wealthy. Her heart, however, held the pain of invisibility and the silent courage of those who endure humiliation in exchange for survival. Until that day. Until the moment when fate, cruel and unexpected, decided that the life of an innocent child would be put at risk. It was at the sound of the desperate scream, the sound of water, and the desperation in the mansion's garden that everything changed. The maid, previously invisible, ran without thinking, and in that plunge, her life and his would never be the same. The scream echoed like thunder through the garden. The millionaire's son, who had been playing by the pool, now struggled silently beneath the blue water. The guests screamed, his wife froze, and the millionaire, without an immediate reaction, watched his world crumble in seconds. It was then that she, the ignored maid, launched herself without hesitation, diving deep, crossing the pool's broken reflection as if it were the line separating life from death. When she emerged, carrying the child in her arms, soaked, panting, but firm, silence fell over everyone. In that moment, he didn't see a maid. He saw the woman who had just saved the most precious thing in his life. And what began there wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of a forbidden feeling, strong and uncontrollable, that would forever change the fate of that mansion. The mansion stood like a modern palace on the outskirts of Miami, surrounded by immaculate gardens and high walls separating luxury from the common world. Iron gates opened only for luxury cars, uniformed chandeliers, and high-profile guests. Inside, everything gleamed excessively, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden lights, marble floors echoing with steady footsteps, walls adorned with artwork that no one really stopped to admire. The millionaire lived there as if he were part of an endless play, surrounded by numbers, contracts, and appearances. His eyes were always fixed on reports and screens, rarely on people. Accustomed to being served, he didn't notice faces, only functions. Among these invisible faces was she, the blonde maid, with a sweet, silent gaze. She passed through the hallways carrying trays, changing tablecloths, cleaning up party leftovers, and erasing traces of the wealthy's indifference. She went unnoticed, unremembered, except when something needed to be done, urgently. Her employer, the millionaire's wife, made a point of reminding her of her place. With sharp words, she always found a way to humiliate her, to show her that she was nothing more than a shadow in that gilded kingdom. Still, the young woman remained steadfast, silent, sustained by necessity and the invisible. Strength that only those who have been ignored know how to cultivate. In the midst of this scenario, there was the child. The millionaire's son, just a few years old, lived like a lonely prince. He had grown up surrounded by expensive toys, but starved for attention. His mother was always busy with parties, trips, and friends who fought over trivialities. His father, meanwhile, immersed in business, saw the boy only at regulated times, as if he were just another part of his schedule. The boy, restless and curious, sought glances he rarely met. And it was precisely in the maid that he began to notice gestures of humanity he had never seen within that house. The millionaire, however, did not notice. He passed her by as if passing a piece of furniture. He saw the work, not the person, and for his wife, treating her as invisible wasn't enough. She needed to step on her, diminish her, make every moment a test of submission. But fate, silent, waited for the right moment to reverse the order. Mornings at the mansion began early, long before the first rays of sunlight filtered through the enormous glass windows. The maid would wake up in the dark, catch 2 crowded buses, and, exhausted, arrive at the side gate in her impeccably pressed uniform, even if worn with time. She always entered through the same narrow hallway reserved for employees, where the glow of the chandeliers didn't reach, and the floor no longer gleamed like that of the main entrance. It was in this invisible space that she prepared to face another day of work in silence. At breakfast, the ritual was always the same. The main table was set as if for a banquet, even though the family rarely lingered over their meal. The wife liked to show off to her friends who arrived early, displaying exotic fruits, rare cheeses, and imported cakes. The maid meticulously attended to every detail, but it was never enough. A misplaced cup or a knife turned at the wrong angle was enough for her mistress to raise her voice and express her impatience. "You can't even get that right. That's why no one like you gets anywhere." The words were always accompanied by malicious laughter from her friends, as if humiliating herself were part of the morning's entertainment. The millionaire sitting at the head of the table rarely spoke. He limited himself to leafing through the newspaper or responding to messages on his cell phone, ignoring the scene. Sometimes his eyes would look up for a brief moment, but quickly return to the printed letters, as if he hadn't seen anything. For the maid, this silence was a second wound, the first from her wife's contempt, the second from his indifference. Still, she swallowed hard, lowered her head, and continued on, as if her very breath were an apology. It was a Tuesday morning when the house was still yawning amid the smell of coffee and the distant sound of leaf blowers, that the boy appeared in the pantry with a broken toy car in his hands. The maid would have walked right past as she always did, but his gaze, insistent and quiet, stopped her. Without asking anything, he simply placed the toy on the table and waited. She grabbed some tape, a rubber band, a drop of glue forgotten in the pantry, and, with the delicacy of someone mending not an object but an instant, put the wheels back in place. The boy's smile appeared like a sunrise. He didn't say thank you. He took 2 steps back, tested the toy on the marble floor, and before leaving, he left a dinosaur sticker on the table, a silent gift she would only notice at the end of her shift. After that, small rituals began to emerge. She would walk through the playroom, pick up scattered pencils, and, without attracting attention, line up 3 blank sheets of paper with a glass of orange juice beside her. The boy would sit, draw monsters and airplanes, and always leave a drawing for someone to keep in the kitchen. At the bottom of the page, crooked letters spelled out a name he dared not say aloud. She would carefully fold the paper and hide it in her apron pocket, like someone guarding an amulet. The music began before sunset, as if someone had decided the night needed to come early. The mansion took on a different, public, theatrical glow. Lanterns lit in the garden, spotlights aimed at the palm trees, waiters crossing the paths with glasses that clinked like little bells. On the terrace, the laughter of his wife's friends spread in waves, and each guffaw seemed to say, "We're on top," while the millionaire, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, greeted investors, distributed handshakes, and made calculated remarks. The pool, the nerve center of the party, reflected the Miami sky in a dark blue mirror, blades of light dancing on the surface as if hiding secrets. It was beautiful, but treacherous. The moment of the fall was announced not by a scream or an alarm, but by a dry, discreet sound, as if the boy's body had broken the surface of the water without asking permission. The plastic boat turned sideways, spinning in fragile circles, while the little boy disappeared into the turquoise depths. For a second, no one noticed. The music still blared, bowls clinked, conversations overlapped. The world seemed too distracted to notice that a child's life was being extinguished there, just a few meters away. But the waitress noticed. It was the sudden silence of her heart that made her see what other eyes ignored. A childish shadow struggling beneath them. Water, short arms reaching for air that wouldn't come. When the boy's breath returned, panting and desperate, the entire mansion had already changed. His wife, humiliated by her own inaction, couldn't tear her son from the employee's arms. The millionaire, in shock, found no words. He simply let out a thank you that carried more than gratitude. It carried the beginning of admiration, and in that instant, everyone realized that the invisible hierarchy had been shattered. The invisible woman had become before everyone the pillar that supported what mattered most. Their bond grew in silence. The millionaire began to appear in unlikely hallways, quietly asking about his son's sleep, hearing answers that sounded like lessons in humanity. Small rituals emerged, lingering glances, short conversations. The boy, stronger every day, laughed again. But his wife felt the change in the air, and her cruelty soon intensified. She tore up drawings, spread rumors, and accused the young woman of seducing the family. Until one day, in front of everyone, she staged the stolen bracelet hoax and, under the pretext of preserving her honor, threw the maid out through the iron gates. The boy begged, but it was no use. The millionaire, trapped by appearances, didn't stop her. He simply held his silence like a knife. She left with dignity, carrying the patched-up boat in her bag, a reminder of a promise that courage won't let die. The mansion gleamed again on the outside, but inside it was crumbling. The boy cried all night long, rejecting new caregivers. The millionaire, emptied, found himself reviewing security footage that disproved his wife's accusations. He discovered the poisonous rumors, the lies spread in social circles, and decided to act. He hired lawyers and auditors, and at the same time, anonymously, ensured that the young woman had a decent job in a city hotel. He didn't give her handouts. He gave her back what had always been hers, her dignity. The truth, as always, found its way out. The insurance company released the recordings. His wife's ring shone as irrefutable proof. Invitations began to disappear, social doors closed, and the reputation she so carefully cultivated crumbled. Meanwhile, the young woman silently rebuilt herself, earning respect with every gesture. And then came the charity ball, a stage chosen by fate. In front of everyone, the millionaire spoke about social projects, but midway through his speech, he dropped the sentence, "My son is alive because someone you called nobody risked his life. This person was wronged, but today the truth is before us all." The hall fell silent. His wife, pale, found nowhere to hide. The boy ran and handed the boat to his father. The millionaire held it up and added, "This small object represents courage. It represents life." Applause erupted. The maid, blushing, tried to leave discreetly, but she was recognized as never before. She wasn't invisible. She was a symbol of dignity and karma. Discreet and relentless had done its job. That night, each received what they deserved. The wife, contempt; the boy, security; the maid, respect; and the millionaire, the clarity that he had taken too long to see the obvious. That true greatness lies not in gold, but in those who save without asking for anything in return. And so the wheel turned. Those who humiliated were humiliated. Those who suffered in silence were exalted. Because karma never fails. It simply waits for the right moment to return to each person a reflection of what they offered to the world. If this story touched you, leave a like so more people can feel the same emotion. Subscribe to the channel and follow other stories of courage, destiny, and upheaval that will touch your heart.